everyone, my name is Amber, welcome back to my channel and welcome to my first book review of the year. Today I'm going to be reviewing and discussing the Arc of the Scythe series by Neal Shusterman. I'm going to be discussing all three books in one video, so I will leave timestamps both on screen and in the description box below so you can skip ahead or skip backwards if you want to. I figure if you're only interested in knowing whether or not you should read the series, you should just listen to my Scythe review, and then those of you who are invested or just like to hear me talk, you can go ahead and listen all the way through to the toll. So first off, I guess I should start by telling you what the series is about. I'm not going to spoil anything in this description for any of the books, so you're free to listen. Arc of the Scythe is set in a futuristic world, our planet, where humans have conquered death. They are now immortal. They can fix all ailments and illnesses, apart from a couple. Like, I don't think they can fix burning to death because then there's not enough left for them to fix. But anything else, you're pretty much good to go. And once you reach a certain age, you can also revert back to a previous physical form. So if you reach the age of 60, you can go back into your 20s. Because of this, the Earth is about to become massively overpopulated because nobody is freaking dying. And so scythes are a thing. This is basically a kind of committee group that goes around killing people. Now, they don't go around mass murdering for the most part, but they do go around culling the population because it's kind of necessary. And the two main characters, Rowan and Citra in Scythe, are to become Scythe's apprentices, which means they're going to be taken on by one Scythe called Scythe Faraday and trained up to become full-time Scythes. In amongst all of this, there is also an AI called the Thunderhead, which watches over things and makes sure humans are okay. So onto the book review for Scythe. I have read some of Neal Shusterman's books before and I've really enjoyed them. The Unwind series is one of my favourites. I haven't finished it yet, but it's a very, very good one. And since I loved that so much, I don't know why I took forever to pick up Scythe, but I'm so glad I did because I read Scythe and Thunderhead in 2019, just before the toll came out. And because I was so hesitant, I have to say that Scythe was surprisingly enjoyable, even though it shouldn't really have been a surprise for me. I absolutely loved the concept of humans conquering death and then overpopulating the planet and then people having to kill them in order to sustain life. I do find that with Neal Shusterman's books, my favourite things are the concepts that he comes up with. In Scythe, we tackle immortality and overpopulation. In Dry, which he wrote with his son, he talks about the drought and the way the world is heading with the environmental crisis. In Unwind, he writes about a world in which abortion is banned, but then what do you do if you don't want the child? And he brings up some very good moral questions, in my opinion. Not so much in Scythe, this first book, but definitely as the series progresses, he talks more and more about morality and ethics. I really, really dig that. I did also really like the fact that this book started out as kind of a training thing, where you have two apprentices training under a master Scythe, and he's teaching them their ways, because that's one of my favourite tropes. And then midway through, things are kind of flipped on their heads a bit and it goes in a completely different direction to what I was expecting. It kind of blew my mind a little bit because I wasn't expecting Neal Shusterman to do something like that. In terms of the characters, I have to say I found them a bit dull. I really did like Citra, however I think I grew to like her more as the series went on. In this first book she was just okay / good. Rowan was boring. I really enjoyed the things that were going on in his chapters, but his personality and himself, he's just so dull. And my opinion on him doesn't really change throughout the series. Obviously, if you have read YA before, you'll know that Rowan and Citra are bound to get together at some point. I'm not going to say whether or not they do in this book, but the romance and the tension between them was just boring as well. It might be because I didn't really get invested in the characters all that much. It might be because Rowan was really dull, but I really don't think Neal Shusterman is very good at writing romance. I had the same problem with his Unwind series in that the main characters who got together there just had no chemistry. There wasn't enough build up for me and I just didn't care about them. One thing that I did wish was more prevalent in this book was the world building. I wanted to know more about the environment that these characters were in, the politics and things, but we did get a lot more of that in Thunderhead and in the Toll. So I gave this book 4 stars because I did really enjoy it. It was a really fun concept, and a couple of things that I remember thinking that got better were Citra, the main character, the world building, because I wanted a lot more of that, and also getting to know the Thunderhead a bit more because you don't really know much about it in the first book, but it becomes more relevant in the second and third. And by that point I was very, very attached to the character, which is an AI, and it's really quite weird, but I really, really enjoyed it. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Thunderhead, the second book in the trilogy. I'm probably going to spoil some things that happened in Scythe, so if you haven't read Scythe, then I would recommend going back and reading it before watching the rest of this video, unless you don't care about spoilers, because I know some of us don't. So Thunderhead, I also gave this one 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. I think I liked it a lot more than I liked Scythe, even though I've given them both the same star rating, just because I was a lot more invested in the world building and the characters at this point. I grew to love Citra throughout this book. She had a lot more going on. Rowan, again, not so much, didn't really care for him. So much was happening with Citra, and I really enjoyed her character development. I really enjoyed getting to know the politics of this world a lot more and kind of learning the hierarchy of the Scythedom. In terms of the plot, I did find that this book used a lot of the same tropes as the Unwind series, which I didn't care too much about because I still really enjoyed it and it's a solid book in its own right. That's just something I wanted to mention. The plot structure was very similar. I could point out quite a few things for like almost direct takeaways from the Unwind series, even though I haven't read the series in a while. So that's something to bear in mind. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that I thought of. I think this book really suffered from a couple of characters not having enough to do. There was Rowan, who was sort of just being pushed around for most of it and not really having a solid plot point. He was kind of there just to give us a point of view, to tell us what was going on in other places, and he himself didn't really do too much. And then Scythe Faraday was also kind of drifting and researching, and it really wasn't that interesting compared to what was going on with Citra and the head Scythes. So I feel like if that had been tightened up a bit, it would have been a lot more interesting, especially because this is a slightly bigger book than Scythe. We could have spent some more time on that. Thunderhead was a bit slower to start than Scythe as well, which is probably due to the size. Once I got into it, the plot was a lot more fast-paced, but Neal Shusterman spent a lot of time introducing us to the Thunderhead properly and getting to know it and its history and where it fits within the world. That was probably the part of the book that I enjoyed the most, along with learning the politics of the Scythedom. I really enjoyed learning more about the Thunderhead and what it was going to do and what it was going through as well, because it's sentient and it really cares about humans. So reading from its point of view was very interesting. It was really intriguing to see its thought process when it came to the human race, because it might have had to do some bad things in order to protect humanity as a whole. Honestly, I just think the Thunderhead is a really interesting character and I would like another book about it. Once again, morality and ethics are brought up. I'm not going to say in what capacity or what kinds of things are talked about, but I really appreciated that, and I think this is where Neal Shusterman's strength is. That was a very hard sentence to say. He's very good at bringing up ethical questions within his stories and making the reader really think about all sides of the debates. In terms of the romance, again, I didn't like it. I thought it was a bit ridiculous and boring. Rowan and Citra really don't spend much time together, so if the romance put you off in Scythe, it does mellow out a bit in Thunderhead because they don't have a chance to see one another. But I do feel that towards the end, Neal Shusterman was still trying to sell the romance to the reader, and it's just not something I care about. The author also introduced a lot of new characters in this book, and I really enjoyed all of them. I loved getting to know more about Scythe Curie, who featured in the first book a bit, but definitely not as much as in this one. I really liked what the author did to both expand the world and also keep the familiarity for readers of the previous book, because I feel like he has so many ideas with this series and he could have gone off on so many tangents, which is kind of what happened in The Toll, but we'll talk about that later. He could have got really carried away, but he managed to kind of keep it to its roots, so to speak, while also branching out. I'm just going to quickly mention the ending without spoilers. Of course, I'm not going to spoil Thunderhead, but the ending was a bit overdramatic. I was texting my friend while we were both reading it, and some really outright ridiculous things happened, and I thought it was hilarious. It didn't like take me out of the story at all. At the same time, I thought it was quite dramatic, if a little silly. Taken out of context, it would probably make for a really good comedy bit. And to be honest, I also got a little bit creeped out over this one scene. So there's that. Overall, I really enjoyed Thunderhead. I gave it 4 stars, like I said, and then I continued on to The Toll. Again, for The Toll, I might spoil what happened in Thunderhead, so be careful if you haven't read up to The Toll. Feel free to click off this video and come back later. Okay, so The Toll was really freaking long. It's over 600 pages, but in my opinion it was well worth it. I loved every single second of it, and I was considering giving it 5 stars, except I didn't. More on that later. But so much happened in this book, I feel like it had to be this long, and because I wanted more world building and more history and more political stuff, I was absolutely thrilled by the length of this book. I think some people probably have issues with the length of it because it does go on forever, but I personally really enjoyed it. Even though it was really long, it didn't feel like there were any filler chapters or moments. Everything, and I mean absolutely everything that happened in this book, was meaningful and had a purpose later on, even if I didn't realise it at the time. Again, seeing different parts of the Scythedom was great. Seeing what was going on with the two sides of what is essentially a war was really interesting. In terms of the characters, I was quite happy that it focused a lot less on Citra and Rowan. They didn't show up until about a quarter of the way through the book because they were still underwater. And so we had some time to explore some new people and also some old ones. Scythe showed up quite early on, although he didn't really have much to do. Considering I got so attached to him in the first book, it was a shame that his character kind of got put on the back burner and didn't have anything going on. A lot of the new characters were really interesting, but not all that memorable, apart from one. I can't remember their name. They're gender fluid and their gender changed dependent on the weather. And I've seen some complaints about that being over the top, but to be honest, I thought it was quite interesting. I think the main complaints about that were that the character kept talking about their fluidity and their gender. It kept being brought up and explained in different ways, and whoever reviewed it that way didn't enjoy that. I think you have to remember that this series is written for teenagers who may not be all that familiar with the concept. It's probably better to keep talking about it and keep the conversation going rather than just mention it once and then brush it off, because I think it's a very important conversation to have. And if the teenagers perhaps are familiar with the concept, or adults for that matter, whoever's reading the book, then they might need some reassurance. So why not bring it up over and over again in a 600-page book? If you bring it up a few times, then it's not really going to ruin anything. I do wonder if Neal Shusterman had seen reviews talking about Citra and Rowan and realised they weren't that interesting as main characters and had decided to just kind of like leave them behind, or maybe he felt that way from the beginning and that's why he didn't write them to be very interesting in the first place, because this book really focused on everything else but them for the most part. That said, I did miss Citra a bit. I did really like her character. It's just Rowan who I didn't care about. And then as for the ending, I was kind of blown away by it. There was so much action going on. There wasn't as much focus on the action towards the end as I thought there was going to be. I thought there were going to be more chapters that were kind of action-packed and like everyone was going to be dying. It all happened fairly quickly. I really loved it. However, I would like to see more of this world, especially of the things that happened after the toll. I think this is just me being greedy now, but I really enjoy Neal Shusterman's world building, and I think he's got a really good concept going here with so many ethical questions going on that I think he could explore several different things. I'm trying not to spoil the ending of the toll because that's not my goal here. So I think he could explore a couple of different avenues judging by how the toll finished, and I would absolutely read everything that he brings out that's set in the same universe. So I gave the toll 4.5 stars. I was considering giving it 5, but after sitting on it, I think I would know if it was a 5-star read, and it's just not quite there. So I'm giving it 4.5 stars, which is pretty much a favourite of all time. As for the series as a whole, overall, I thought it was a completely solid series. I would say that it's a 5-star series, even though I didn't give any of the books 5 stars on their own. I think it is so memorable and it's going to stick with so many people. It's no wonder it's so popular on BookTube and on Book Twitter. Like I said, it does reuse some tropes from the Unwind series, but that's okay. I didn't really care about that much, and I was too invested in this series to really care about what happened in Unwind and what it took from there. The romance continues to be lackluster throughout. The two main characters, Citra and Rowan, didn't really care too much for them. I cared more about the side characters, but I think this series has strengths that lie in the world building and the questions that it brings to the reader rather than the characters themselves. That's my review of the Scythe trilogy. I've never done a full series review before, so let me know if the layout didn't really work for you. I wasn't really sure how else I could do this without spoiling anything. Maybe I could do a spoiler discussion for some series or some books. Let me know in the comments below what you would like, and also let me know what you would do if you could live forever. Thank you so much for watching my video. I'll speak to you all in the next one. Bye!